there, studio music teacher friends. Welcome to the Beyond Measure podcast. That's with me, Christina Whitlock, and I just hang out here in your favorite podcasting app as your anytime piano teacher friend. I love nothing more than offering you a dose of encouragement for this important work we do. So before we jump onto today's stop in the summer bookshelf tour, I have just a couple of announcements. First of all, if you are not subscribed to my email list, what are you even doing with your life? I'm kidding, of course, but last spring, I started sending out a weekly e-letter that I call One Thought Thursdays, and it's been such a fun new project. The way it has opened up more communication with my audience is nothing short of spectacular in my mind. So, in that weekly letter, I offer up one thing for you to think about, and then I also give you some of my favorite things, like a favorite piece of supplemental repertoire and a favorite studio purchase I've made. It's pretty packed with good stuff, if I do say so myself, so do yourself a favor and get on that list, okay? Head to ChristinaWhitlock.com/subscribe to make sure that I get into your inbox this Thursday. Secondly, if you are attending NCKP, the National Conference on Keyboard Pedagogy, this week, I hope to see you at my session on Wednesday at 5:30. I also hope you'll stop by my informal meet and greet session for podcast listeners on Thursday from 4:15 to 5 in the hotel lobby. I'm doing that meetup with my real-life piano teacher friend, Amy Chaplin, from the Piano Pantry blog and podcast, and we each have a little something fun to give you. Stop by for 1 minute or for 45 minutes, whatever. I'd love to meet you live and in person. And by the way, if you see me walk by during the conference, just say, "Hey, teacher friend," and I will know that you are one of my people, all right? All right. Okay, on to today's episode. We are talking about the book Under Pressure by Dr. Lisa Damour. Maybe you are familiar with Lisa Damour's work. She writes a lot for the New York Times, and she has a podcast called Ask Lisa, The Psychology of Parenting. All of her work comes highly recommended by yours truly, and you may notice that her work primarily centers on parenting. But today's book, Under Pressure, offers some very important perspective for any of us who work with adolescents and teens. The subtitle of Under Pressure is Confronting the Epidemic of Stress and Anxiety in Girls. Now, I will argue that much of this content is also applicable to adolescents of any gender, but it is obviously geared towards girls. You may know that anxiety is a strong point of interest for me. I'm an anxious person who married another anxious person, and we have created some very anxious offspring. I have learned so much about stress and its manifestations from each of these relationships in my life, through my husband, through myself, and through my children. I actually presented a session at the 2022 MTNA conference called Anxious Teachers, Anxious Students, Navigating Stress in the Studio. So in that presentation, I recounted a lot of my own experience on this subject matter. I'm just throwing it out there that you have access to that session when you join the Patreon community for $6 a month. Just saying. I think that there are many reasons that I am so intrigued with the study of anxiety as a music teacher. First of all, I recognize the nature of music itself is a natural way to cope with stress. But at the same time, the study of learning to play music is often viewed as a source of stress, and that really bothers me. I also believe a lot of us, as teachers, are dealing with a lot of unaddressed anxieties of our own. So, for more on that, you'll need to go back to episode 134 of this podcast and listen to the summer bookshelf tour on the book Burnout. But beyond all of those things, I just think it's incredibly important that we stay updated on what is happening in the lives of the generations that we are teaching. When we are in a lesson with a student, we need to strive to be less focused on our own selves and more attuned with the experience that we are providing for our students through their eyes. And to better understand the experiences of our students, we need to be aware of these societal trends that are shaping our students' lives outside of our studios. And that, friends, is why I think this is such an important read for music teachers. Sure, not every single aspect of this book is going to feel relevant as an educator, but the big picture takeaways will help you better understand the behavior that you are seeing from your adolescent students. Let's jump into my 3 featured takeaways from Under Pressure, shall we? First up, I want to think about the nature of these terms, stress and anxiety. The emphasis of chapter 1 in this book is the fact that stress and anxiety are not always negative things. There are good forms of stress. Dr. Damour says, and I quote, "To a degree, these mental states are catalysts for human growth and development." End quote. She goes on to talk about how healthy stress can come from taking on new challenges, of course. She talks about things like public speaking and learning to navigate conflict amongst your peer groups, which, those things are really stressful, especially at first, right? But I think we can all agree that building the skill sets to talk articulately in front of groups or to be able to address social dynamics in a productive manner, those are really great challenges to overcome, yeah? Chapter 1 introduced me to the concept of stress inoculation, which is an actual term that researchers use to describe the fact that resilience is often strongest in those who have had to navigate long-term stressors. In other words, your tolerance to stress does build over time and exposure to it. Dr. Damour reminds us to approach stress levels using kind of a Goldilocks principle. As parents, and I will add as music teachers, we want to be careful that our students are not facing too much or too little stress in these developmental years. We want them to be in that zone where their challenges feel just right. I think for me, that is actually a real challenge. As a parent, I do know that my gut instinct is to jump in and eliminate any sense of friction in my children's lives. Fortunately, I can usually override that impulse and recognize that a little discomfort, a little struggle, or a little uncertainty, those are important things for children to learn to navigate. As a piano teacher, I have to balance those very same ideas. There are times where I do need to push my students a little bit harder. But at the same time, I've also had occasions where I've pushed too much and expected too many things. And neither of those situations result in the best experience for our students. Now, you know me. I am in this business to create lifelong makers of music. I don't believe in approaching music as a series of to-do lists. I want my students to feel their lives are enriched by the opportunity to sit down at the piano and play. Not that it's a chore or an expectation or anything that they're doing for any other reason than it makes them feel good. But the funny thing is, that doesn't mean that I should approach their instruction with zero expectations. It doesn't mean that I need to back down when I think they're up against a challenge. I mean, as long as it's a realistic one. My goal is to let my students acknowledge when they feel unsure or intimidated or up against something stressful, and then to guide them through the process to victory. And then, little by little, that stress inoculation Lisa Damour talks about in this book is going to work its magic. Okay, so that's our first point for today. Not all stress is bad. That probably means our second point should be examining unhealthy stress, right? Oh man, that's not nearly as much fun. But okay, the trickiest part of unhealthy stress is the fact that it just varies from person to person. Like, we can't draw lines in the sand and say, as teachers, we can expect our students to accomplish this, but we cannot expect them to accomplish that. I wish it was that easy. Because, as Dr. Damour explains, unhealthy stress is not at all defined by the actual stressor. Rather, it's defined by the resources that are available to the person experiencing the problem. Like, how is this person equipped to deal with the stress? She talks about like children who experience sickness, how those with parents who are able to help them with their recovery have a very different experience than those who don't. And there are many other examples that make a lot of sense in this book. When it comes down to it, psychologists consider stress to be unhealthy when it interferes with short-term or long-term well-being. So, for example, if stress is causing lack of sleep, then that's unhealthy because we need our rest. If poor performance experience manifests itself into a future disdain for playing in public, that's unhealthy, right? That's why we have to be so attuned to our students' experiences and help them unpack their many feelings around playing their instruments. A poor relationship with a music teacher can really destroy a student's attitude towards music study, not just for their lives, but even into the future when they are parents themselves. So I say all of this to remind you that as you are dealing with anxious students, and I'm sure you've had at least a few, we want to make sure that none of our expectations are causing adverse effects on our students' well-being. That sounds obvious, I know. Like, none of us would ever engage in that knowingly. But I think it's a good barometer to use with our students. Like, when so-and-so comes to you and wants to participate in the local concerto competition this year, but you're not really sure they're ready. That's a big one. Like, you have to weigh that carefully because on one hand, there's the idea of them doing it for the overall experience. You know, even if they're not in a position to win the thing yet, maybe it's good for them to have the experience. But on the other hand, is your student truly ready to undergo that level of preparation? Are they ready to play alongside that level of musical peers? Will that experience fuel a long-lasting love for their art? Or is it going to be detrimental to your overall goal? Like, those are the things we must consider. Okay, so we've talked about healthy stress and unhealthy stress, and there were a million different directions I wanted to go for our third point today, but I have settled on this one. Point number 3 from the book Under Pressure. There is this fascinating portion that begins on page 62, and it's titled, Money Can Buy Stress. In this section, Dr. Damour points out a significant body of research that shows teenagers from wealthy families are more likely to suffer from things like depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. That's interesting, right? I chose to highlight this portion because it is somewhat related to a lot of our work. Most of us teaching large studios deal with at least some, quote, wealthy families, right? It's kind of a truth of our work. Unless we are specifically seeking out grants and other opportunities to teach lower income families, we need to work with families who have stable income. It's an aspect of teaching that I often lament because I know how desperately kids from lower income homes need this kind of skill. But I digress. Anyway, I'm highlighting this portion because likely you teach at least some students from wealthy families. And hear me, there are many exceptions to this rule. So this is not designed to start a gripe fest over wealthy families. I am not here for that. But just think about this with me, okay? The research is showing that lower income families, or those who live more simplified lifestyles, often have stronger family ties. They spend more time together, they play more together, and all of those factors result in more emotionally stable young people. On the other hand, children who grow up in families who are constantly working or who are often being raised by others besides the parents, or in families where they end up spending excessive amounts of time alone, those children are going to struggle more. Plus, of course, think about these overscheduled teenagers we all know and love. Again, those students who are constantly being shuffled to and fro, who barely have any time to breathe, let alone practice the piano, they are surely being inundated with a lot of pressure. And I just have to reiterate here that I am not blaming their parents. I know a lot of you do. That's just not my bag. Parenting is really hard. It's very difficult to discern how much is too much. And again, just like stressors, it just varies so much between individuals. And as a parent, you do feel this enormous responsibility to nurture your child's passions and talents. And, we all have different manifestations of that. So I always try to cut parents their slack. And frankly, that's been a very successful business model for me. So, just like I've been saying every single week of the summer bookshelf tour, this is just one small glimpse into the wisdom that can be found in this book. If you ever find yourself passing judgment on, kids these days, or if you are fearful for future generations, I would strongly recommend reading this book, or any of those written by Lisa Damour. She writes with truth and with research, but also with hope, which is what I enjoy most about her work. It's like, yeah, our kids are facing some real trouble here, but here's how you can help. And I know you care about helping your students grow in their fullest potential as human beings and as musicians. You wouldn't listen to this podcast if you didn't. So, add Under Pressure to your to-be-read list pronto, will you? I think you'll be better for it. And now, grab the nearest glass because it's time for a toast. Studio music teacher friends from all around the world, today we are owning the fact that we have a very important role to play in the development of the young people we work with. Mind you, we have to stay in our lanes, so to speak. We have to understand the limitations of our role in our students' lives. But we also need to acknowledge the fact that our interactions with them matter. The words we choose, the expectations we come up with, the challenges that we offer, these things are not without consequence. As we sit on the precipice of a new school year, I hope we are all able to continue to mentor our students in the best of all ways. May we build up lifelong musicians, lovers and players of great music, whatever that means to them, for the rest of their lives. That is the goal. Cheers to all of that, my friends. Hear, hear. That's a wrap on episode 136. Don't forget to get yourself on my email list to receive One Thought Thursdays. That link can be found in the show notes for this episode or at christinawhitlock.com/subscribe. If I'm going to be seeing you at the NCKP conference this week, don't be shy, okay? Just say, "Hey, teacher friend," and I will be so happy to meet you. Again, my session is at 5:30 on Wednesday. And then be sure to come say hello to myself and Amy Chaplin on Thursday at 4:15 in the Westin Hotel lobby. It will be a good time, and we both have a little gift for you stopping by. Until we meet again, teacher friends, onward and upward toward your next adventure.